Afternoon all, welcome to Archant Towers, you know the drill. Dave Fraser here alongside Connor Southwell. We'll be heading up north shortly when Paddy gives us a shout, about 6 o'clock, getting most of the journey done so that we don't have to go all the way up to Liverpool tomorrow, staying Stoke-ish, so nice 3.5-4 hours on the road tonight. But first we thought we'd catch up with you good people. Connor, international break to shake off that Watford defeat. You feeling you had a week off, haven't you? So you feeling refreshed?
Certainly am. Yeah, it's felt like it's dragged a little bit this one actually in comparison to some. I don't know if that's because it's been a bit more negative, perhaps. Who knows? But yeah, glad that domestic football's back. Always glad when Premier League football and Norwich City return. I think it makes things a bit more exciting, doesn't it?
Yeah. I don't mind international football. I know some people are totally the other way, aren't they? And unless it's England, they're not remotely interested. But at least with this one, we had Timu Pukki, didn't we? And that is a heck of a story. Finland qualifying for their first ever major international tournament, and to have a Norwich player not only in the thick of it, but absolutely crucial to it. And he ended up joint 4th top scorer in the Euros, so ahead of with Harry Kane, Cristiano Ronaldo, and someone from Israel that I've never heard of, ahead of him in the goal scoring chart. So that's not half bad, is it? Do get your questions and comments in, and we'll get through as many of them as we can. I wasn't at the presser today because I actually had a couple of days off, sort of a day off today, kind of half a day off. So Connor is going to be your main man in terms of team news. So do you want to rattle through? There was quite a lot, and you sort of mixed, wasn't it?
Yeah, real mixed bag in terms of injuries. You could argue on one hand it's got worse, and equally on one hand that it's got a little bit better. So we'll start with the defensive situation. Grant Hanley was expected to return after this international break, but has had a minor setback with his groin injury, so he hasn't returned to training yet, although Daniel Farke said today that he was very, very close to, so maybe next week or the week after is the timeline for that. Jamal Lewis obviously withdrew from the Northern Ireland squad with a knee issue. I think it's the same knee issue he had previously. It's just, I think Daniel described it as a bit of a niggly injury as opposed to a major one, so he's going to miss tomorrow as well. And then I suppose the big one really is Joseph Dermich, of course struggled with a hamstring injury against Watford. He's going to be out for 8 weeks with that, so we're not going to see him until January. So that's the negative news. It's not as long as some lists we've had this season for sure. If we look on the more positive side, Kenny McLean was a major doubt with a hamstring injury. Obviously didn't technically withdraw from the Scotland squad, but didn't feature in either of those games against Cyprus or Kazakhstan. He is fit for tomorrow. And then the big one, I suppose, save the best till last, Christoph Zimmermann is back from that foot injury 2 months earlier than expected. Was originally supposed to be January, wasn't it? But he is back and is probably poised to start tomorrow, I would imagine.
Yeah, Daniel didn't disguise that too well, did he? Looking at the
No.
quotes, it was sort of I don't want to give too much away, but if Christoph's training, then he can start.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, I guess most Norwich fans will approve of that as we sit here right now, because you know, in perfect circumstances, of course, you would have Zimmermann starting ahead of Amadou or Teti in defence. You would have thought it would have been Amadou. But if it were to go wrong and he were to suffer a recurrence of that foot injury, there's going to be some very unhappy Norwich fans, because that means that a risk has been taken, doesn't it? And you would presume that if he's even in contention, that they are absolutely certain and happy that foot is ready for contact.
Absolutely, it has to be. Given their situation with centre-backs this season, he has to be ready, because if this is another risk, then as we've seen this season, as we saw a bit last season as well, it's probably not a risk worth taking at the moment, given where Norwich find themselves, both in terms of personnel and in terms of the league. Pad actually put that question to him, was it a bit optimistic for Zimmermann to start, and he said yeah, it probably is optimistic, but he's a strong guy and a strong character, so I mean, players are always going to say that they're ready and that they want to play.
Particularly a player like him, who's sort of that tub-thumping sort of leader almost.
Absolutely, yeah, and was captain for a lot of last season, wasn't he, as well? So probably takes a lot of responsibility and feels like he can make an impact. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they set up with him in the side, and if they do switch formation, which again he hinted at heavily today, or whether Zimmermann can really improve that defence, one that has leaked a lot of goals since he's been absent. So I think it's 20 minutes at West Ham was pretty much all he got before he suffered that foot injury. But positive news, we just hope that now they can have a bit of continuity at the back, because that's something they haven't had all season.
Yeah, I mean, if he does switch to a 3 at the back, then I guess that's still going to have Amadou involved, and you would have Godfrey and Amadou either side of Zimmermann, and then he potentially, if he's sort of a sweeper who sits that little bit deeper and hopefully isn't having to slide into too many tackles, he's then relying on his aerial ability. Obviously his height helps him in that respect, and at set pieces, then I guess you could see that making sense. But I certainly would be going with 3 at the back if Daniel feels he's got the personnel available. Presumably that would mean Aaron's left back and Byram right back, or wing back, sorry, without Jamal Lewis being available, because Everton, their position is probably a false one. You look at the talent they've got. I mean, Gylfi Sigurdsson is a player that I really rate. He can bang in a ball from 30 yards quite comfortably, can't he? But Yerry Mina is a very good defender at the back. This Lucas Digne seems to be impressing a lot on left back. They've got some real quality in there. So I think it is one of those games they've got to go into with a defensive approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other alternative to that, and perhaps freeing up Amadou to get him into midfield, is persisting with Tete. But on the evidence of Brighton, and you could probably throw Watford into the mix as well, didn't really prove to be an experiment that really worked and was successful. But it could be something they persist with in a 3. I think you can probably get away with playing Amadou or Tete in a 3 as opposed to a 2. And like you say, you just hope it's protection for Zimmermann and that he can get through 90 minutes, because if he does, then that's going to be a massive boost for him and for the team, because I think you've seen in the way Norwich have played, they've almost had subconsciously that is a weakness in their side, and they've almost had to protect that. But yeah, I think you're spot on. They are going to have to go there and be defensively resilient. I mean, Czech Tozen is a decent striker who's found a little bit of form and has struggled a bit since he signed for Everton. Richarlison, another 13 Premier League goals last season. They signed him for
as many as that,
for £50 million from Watford. So he's a player only 22 as well. So they've got plenty of quality in their side, and as you say, it's just about Marco Silva discovering a solution to try and propel them up the league a little bit, because it does feel like, looking at the squad, that where they are perhaps isn't where they should be, and I think that's something that Daniel recognised as well today. So I think Norwich will go there with a 3 and be quite compact, but equally they've got to try and get some more support to Timu Pukki, because he's been isolated in the last few games, I think.
That's going to be massive. I mean, even Alex Iwobi and Theo Walcott.
Yeah, we chucked several names in there, couldn't we?
They've not fulfilled their potential, probably, particularly Walcott. Iwobi's still got time on his side, but they're both still more than capable of causing damage in the Premier League on their day, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Let's crack through a few comments. Matt Gregory: can Daniel Farke carry on his search for the Hoover sale against Everton after Watford weren't interested in purchasing? Well, the whole point of the analogy is that you've got to keep trying, isn't it? You've got to keep knocking on the doors. So I'm sure he's been drilling that into them all week.
He did bring it up today in relation to...
He mentioned the Hoovers again?
Yeah,
right.
But he's persistent with it, which is interesting. Basically said that Pukki's got to be a bit like a Hoover salesman to break his drought, I suppose. He basically said that when he was a striker, he'd have spells where he would do nothing and the ball would hit the back of the net, and other times where he'd try really hard and it would come off the post. So it was quite a nice line in there, actually, from Daniel.
Maybe this is Daniel's way of trying to tempt James Dyson into investing in the
deal,
club.
Maybe, yeah.
Billionaire. I believe he was born in Norfolk, wasn't he?
I think he's from
Cromer.
Yeah.
Owns Bath Rugby Club, amongst many other things. Maybe they're slowly trying to tempt him towards the club.
Who knows?
It starts here. Who else have we got? Graham Hagan says it's the longest we remain unbeaten when we have the international break. I mean, this season, that's pretty much true. Throughout Farke's time, I'm talking off the top of my head here, really, but they generally do tend to come back in better shape after international breaks, don't they? But obviously the Premier League is different gravy altogether. Shane Watts-Jones really missed Premier League football. So Lewis is out. I'm guessing Byram in. Zimbo potential start. Score predictions from you. I'm hoping 2-1 Norwich. So Shane's going in optimistic. I think we sort of covered that selection issue there. I mean, just going with my head, I'm afraid maybe if Zimmermann does start and they do play 3 at the back, then maybe I would feel a bit more optimistic. But I find it difficult to see Norwich. I'm more confident that they will beat Arsenal at Carrow Road next weekend than of them getting something at Everton this weekend, if I'm perfectly honest. But the most important thing this weekend from the situation they're in is that we see signs of progress, signs of them learning lessons and putting new plans in place so that people can be a bit more optimistic moving forward, even if they can't get a point. Because you don't travel to Everton, who are a very wealthy club, packed full of talent in their squad, and expect to get anything. You just need to see that they're competitive in the Premier League, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah. I think at the moment, as I sit here now, it's difficult to see Norwich not conceding at least a couple of goals. And for any side at any point in any division, that's a major concern, particularly in the Premier League, away from home to a side like Everton, who, as we've listed, have so much attacking quality individually. So I think I am slightly concerned, although I can see how a three at the back could solve some of their defensive issues, not all of them, but I think it could solve some, and at least make them have a bit more of a solid defensive shape and make them a bit harder to beat, which at the moment is crucial, because I don't really think they're keeping themselves in games long enough to really impose themselves. And it's a confidence thing, isn't it? How do you get confidence back? You get it back by getting results, and if that means that they do have to grind out a 0-0 or a 1-1 or even a 1-0 win in more optimistic light, then that's what they're going to have to do, because if not, then they aren't going to find that confidence they need to play the style of football that Daniel Farke wants them to play, I think, particularly at this level.
Okay. Lawn NCFC Smythe says, well, here we are again, some good news on Zimmermann, but then snatched away by news of Lewis, Dermich and Hanley. Hanley, I went and interviewed him in midweek, didn't I? I had an opportunity to catch up with him, and it was sort of obvious that there might be a little bit of injury bad news coming, but he very much wanted to leave that in the hands of Daniel to actually confirm the situation, because that it's one of those sort of classic things, isn't it, in the dressing room. It's up to the manager to make public team news at times, so you could tell he was a bit disappointed about that, but it was still a good opportunity to have a catch up with him about everything last season. I thought the line that I was really keen to get was that discussion between him and Zimmermann about who would lift the trophy, because we never heard it, had we? So I really enjoyed speaking to him. Actually, he was in pretty good spirits, and I think you could really tell that he was desperate to get back in, because now, I mean, if you're totally honest about it, if Zimmermann now has managed to get back before him, and then Zimmermann's got that opportunity to nail down the place in the team, and Hanley would have been so dead set on that. He's had to have 2 operations since he was last playing, on a groin and hernia injury. So he said that's the first time he's ever had surgery as well. So that it's been a tough time for him, and he basically explained that that's why he was struggling at the start of the season. That he had been playing through the pain during pre-season and during those first 3 games before he finally sort of had to give way. But beyond him, Dermich, it's his last 3 or 4 years of his career have been absolutely ruined by injury, haven't they?
They have, yeah, and as I was saying to Paddy when we've come back from Colney, that is the risk you take with this recruitment policy, is that you do pick up those free transfers, and we can sit here and list them. Pukki and okay, it wasn't a free, but Mo Leitner is another example. Those who perhaps could have hit the heights. I think Dermich was 3rd top scorer in the Bundesliga in 1 year of his career.
He was, yeah.
So that shows you his quality, but with that comes a risk, and with Dermich the risk is his fitness, and he hasn't been able to really retain that throughout his career, which has probably prevented him really going on and excelling in Germany, hence why he finds himself at Norwich. So that risk can either go one or 2 ways, and it hasn't particularly started very well for Dermich. Obviously, I don't think he's yet to start a game, is he, in the league? So hasn't really impacted things. I don't think as he'd have liked, and hasn't really looked that great. And okay, he's had sort of 10 minutes here and there, and his second fiddle to Pukki, but he just seems a bit of a square peg in a round hole with the way Norwich want to play with this possession-based football. He seems a bit more physical, and perhaps someone to bring on to try and impact a game in a different way, but he hasn't quite done that yet. And this is more disappointing news for him, and another setback for him. And it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how this affects him mentally when he comes back, and if he can step up and make an impact when he does return, because he's not going to have long in the season to do so. And what this does do, though, on a more positive side, is present a massive opportunity to someone like Adam Idah, who, of course, is 18 and scored for the under-21s of Ireland, didn't he, and has done well internationally. Of course, lots of potential there. So perhaps this could push him up the pecking order, I suppose, alongside Dennis Triveni for the second fiddle. And if Norwich do go for a free at the back, maybe that does give an opportunity for Idah to be part of that too, or at least come on and be part of that too with Pukki. And I mean, we saw at Crawley, he's very raw, but I think you can get away with being a bit rawer if you do have someone who's a bit more disciplined positionally alongside you. So I don't know, it'll be interesting to see Adam Ida's role from now till January, because obviously Norwich don't have anyone else to go with. It's going to be Pukki, Ida and Shribeni. So if they are hoping to impact a game from an offensive sense, that's going to be interesting with how they do that up front, I think. And thank goodness Pukki is fit after he limped off.
I mean, if Pukki's fit, he starts, doesn't he?
Absolutely,
Vast majority, but that would be the key issue now, wouldn't it? If Pukki were to get injured, then, I mean, for me, Ida is a much closer player to Pukki in terms of style, in terms of he's going to lead the line, he's going to be a striker. That's what he does for the Ireland under-21s. He also set up 2 goals for them, didn't he? And there's been a bit of a viral video of some fairly audacious skill, wasn't there, which left one of his teammates with their hands on their head.
I think I'd hurt my hip if I tried that.
Yeah. You're 19, man. Your hips are fine.
Never be too cautious.
And I'd be really interested. You would have thought he'll be on the bench, and from Shribeni's substitute appearances this season, he doesn't look like he's in any type of rhythm at all. Whereas at least Ida's been playing and been successful. That Ireland under-21s group, I read the piece that you've done with sort of the quotes from Adam, being described as sort of the golden generation for them, because their manager Stephen Kenny will succeed Mick McCarthy as of next year, won't he? That is the plan. Mick McCarthy was brought in until the end of Euro 2020, and then Kenny and those players start progressing. So if they clearly are going to rate Ida highly. He starts at that level every time. He's got a good record. Was it 5 goals in 11 games at under 21 level? So he has to be playing football sooner or later, or he's going to start getting restless. The Ireland setup are going to start saying to him, "We want you playing football." So it's going to be interesting if he gets a chance. One goal and it completely can launch his career.
It's the potential element as well, isn't it? It's, do you go for Dennis Shribeni, who I'm not sure how they judge the players, but they might consider that he's slightly ahead of him at this moment in time. He's certainly had more appearances from the bench, hasn't he, than Ida this year? Or do you actually invest in Ida and say, okay, we're going to give you 10 minutes here and there, understand that at first it's going to be a bit of a culture shock playing in the Premier League with the pace and intensity of it, but actually with the hope that we're going to develop you further through those 10 minutes than we'll get out of Shribeni long term. So it'll be interesting to see what viewpoint they take on that, I think. But yeah, certainly a good opportunity for Ida to stake his claim now between now and January until Dermot returns, I think.
I'll take a Pukki goal so that we don't have to worry about it.
Quite frankly. Let's hope so. Yeah,
that's the simplest solution. Dan Smith says, do you think it will be Aarons on the left and Byram on the right? I would have thought, based on what we've seen in the past, often when Daniel switches to 3-5-2 mid-game, it's Mats that goes to the left, isn't it?
The only alternative I can see to that is whether they try something a bit different, because we have seen Hernandez be deployed as a wing-back before, though that's been commonly when Norwich are chasing games, so that could be something else, but I do think it will be Aarons and Byram, to be honest.
Yeah, I would have thought so. Otherwise, it's Philip Heiser, who's completely untested at this level. We did see in the training photos, didn't we, that Rob Nizet, Nizet, it's probably pronounced, Belgium under-19 international, has been in the squad, but that's quite possibly just because they will have needed another left-back in training. So
absolutely.
We'll see. Maybe he'll be on the bench tomorrow. One to keep an eye on. AD Sedgwick says, "Hi guys, hope you're well. Just my opinion. I think maybe we should change formation as teams now know how we play. We've been found out. I think maybe to go 4-4-2, give young Ida a chance with Pukki up front. We have to do something different. Just wondered what you guys think." I'd be very surprised to see 4-4-2 from the start in terms of 2 traditional strikers.
Yeah.
But if you're chasing a game, I wouldn't have a problem with Ida being up there alongside Pukki, rather than, as we saw in the Watford game, where Pukki dropped deeper and Dermot stayed as the lone striker. If you're chasing a game, then occupy the defenders more, because that's kind of Pukki's problem at the moment, isn't it? That he's crowded out a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think there certainly is an argument to drop Pukki a little bit deeper, because realistically, in terms of what Norwich have tried to do, particularly away from home, we saw it at Brighton, the best opportunity came from Zimmermann, and that came from Pukki picking the ball up from deep and turning the defender and running in beyond. So there certainly is an argument to say that if they get Pukki involved in deeper positions and have someone in front of him, that maybe they won't find themselves so isolated from an attacking perspective. But then equally, you lose all of Pukki's intelligent movement and his running off the shoulders of defenders. So it's difficult. I'm not sure Ida is quite ready to be spoke about in those terms, but I certainly think we will see him between now and January, particularly now Dermot is out, and it's up to him to show some signs and stake his claim. But yeah, I think there certainly is an argument for dropping Pukki a bit deeper, but I don't think a 4-4-2 is something that Farke will do unless, as you say, they're chasing the game, which we have seen a little bit of in games, and they've sort of tinkered around with that. But I think if they're going to play two strikers or two strikers-ish, it's going to be a 3-5-2, I think, as opposed to a 4-4-2.
Well, Mike Watts says, why doesn't he give Srebeni a go tomorrow? He always makes his subs too late in games. Why? I think that's become a little bit of an easy presumption about Farke, actually. I mean, he did make double sub in the Man United game, put Hernandez and Steepman on at half-time. I think that's sort of become a little bit of a theme which has been easy to throw at Daniel. But
I remember, and we don't like bringing his name up in these, but when Paul Lambert was Norwich manager, he often got accused of making his subs too early. So I don't think managers can win. If you win the game, you make the subs at the right time, and if you don't, they're at the wrong time, I think. And it just happens that they're in. I mean, no one was talking about it last season, were they? For example, exactly. So there you go.
It's but the Srebeni point, Daniel. Even last season in the league, we generally didn't see him as a striker, did we? It would be on the wings or as the number 10 sort of. I think the only real time was probably that Cardiff game when he did shine, of course, and against Cardiff's reserves, frankly, when he scored one cracking goal and scored another. And I'm pretty sure when he was playing for Paderborn before he signed for Norwich, he was playing as the out-and-out striker because he was second top scorer in that division or something, wasn't he, when Norwich signed him? So, yeah, I mean, Srebeni's career, frankly, it's never really got off the floor at Norwich, has it? So you'd be surprised to see him suddenly doing it in the Premier League. Graham Hagan got to give Buendia a break, and has Roberts gone back to Manchester City? No, he's definitely not gone back to Manchester City. If you have a look at the gallery at PinkUn.com, he is very much in the training session. Was he asked about Roberts during the presser today?
Yeah, he was, and really interesting lines from Daniel today on Patrick Roberts, kind of split in two halves. So he started off talking about how he was pleased with Roberts and pleased with his competition. Said he's brought the best out of someone like Cantwell for having Patrick Roberts around the place, and then sort of caveated that by saying that perhaps people are expecting a little bit too much of Patrick Roberts because he's a Manchester City player, and all of the tag and the weight of expectation that comes with that, and almost pointed to his loan spell at Girona and said, look, this is a team that got relegated in La Liga last season, and he really struggled to get in their side. And then right at the end, perhaps for me, was the most interesting line when he essentially said, look, he's not 18 anymore. He needs to, I don't know if this was him questioning work rate, attitude or whatever. Obviously, we had some issues with tiredness after pre-season. Maybe it's application. To me, it just feels like they're two people on completely separate pages at the moment. And perhaps Roberts isn't moving himself over perhaps as quickly as Farke would like. But he did say that there was no plans at the moment as we stand here now. And obviously, as we accelerate towards the January window, it might change, but there's certainly no plans to cut that loan short at the moment. So plenty of interesting stuff on Patrick Roberts, and it's almost letting itself quite nicely into squad dynamic, which you've spoken about a little bit. It was actually Paddy who prompted that again in terms of saying, look, you've got a guy there who's obviously come on loan and will want to get minutes, but he's not going to be happy. And Farke said he's got a 25-man squad, and as he put it, not all of his players will want to go on holiday with him when they're not playing, I think was the line before saying.
Be the boss.
Exactly. So I think he's fully aware that if they're not playing, they're not going to be happy. But there's obviously an underlying reason why Roberts isn't in that 18, and I think he basically quoted the players ahead of him in terms of Buendia, Hernandez and Cantwell, and I think when you look at that, it's probably a fair argument as to why he isn't in the 18 at the moment.
Okay, well, it's good to see that he's opened up a bit about it, because I think, frankly, fans have wanted to hear a bit more, haven't they?
Absolutely,
so, yeah. It's good that he sort of realised that. A couple more comments in response to what Graham said about Buendia as well. Sean Yallop also says, do you feel that Emmy should have a rest? But Lorne Smythe says Buendia's had 2 weeks break, so that sort of, in terms of fitness-wise, that's probably a fair enough answer. But I just pulled up some stats here. I'm relying on Squawker.com. Premier League chances created so far this season. Emi Buendia is 4th in the whole division with 28 chances created. Everton
in the least minutes as well.
In the least minutes, yeah, 782 minutes. Lucas Digne of Everton, who he is a left back, isn't he? But sometimes moves a bit further forward. 31. Trent Alexander-Arnold, funnily enough, also a fullback / wing back. Alexander-Arnold on 42, and no surprise, Kevin De Bruyne 43, who has got something ridiculous, isn't he? Like 10 assists. I'll just double check that as
well.
well.
He's way out in front, isn't he? Yeah.
But similarly with the assists, hang on, I'm just pulling them up in front of me. Yeah, Kevin De Bruyne is on 9, and Buendia is level with David Silva, Andrew Robertson, Harvey Barnes on 4 after 12 games. So this is the thing. I think we're all looking at this in terms of maybe we were expecting a bit too much too soon from Buendia. The not indiscipline, but the stroppy attitude at times, I think, has maybe inflamed people's thoughts on him a little bit. Of course, the mistake against Watford, these things happen. They've got to move on from it. I'm very sure that's going to have been drilled into him by Farke, maybe even some of his teammates. He knows, without even being told, frankly, that was a massive error. Shot himself in the foot, shot the team in the foot, and that can't happen. I mean, let's not go back over the old ground too much, but what's he even doing on the left side of the pitch? 70 seconds into the game, he shouldn't be there, should he? He's the right winger. Yeah. He should be at least providing some protection to Max Aaron. I know he's allowed a degree of freedom, but that needs to be reined back as far as I'm concerned. And I wonder whether the future for Emi in the Premier League is going to have to be further forward as the number 10 in and around Pukki, where he can have that freedom. And the person on the right who's got to give Max that bit of protection has got to be a bit stricter in their position. That's potentially where I can see it going for Emi.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it's worth switching him over to the left, and actually when Jamal Lewis is fully fit, if we're talking about a flat 4, having him in front of Jamal Lewis, because I think Jamal Lewis is probably offering better protection than Max Aaron's will, and Max is no criticism of him, but wants to bomb on a little bit more and does leave that space exposed. So I saw a graphic of Buendia during the Watford game. I think that the TV had in terms of his statistics in the game, and it had pretty much had him first for everything, which again is fine, but it's all relative, because if someone's having 24 dribbles, it's all about where they're dribbling the ball, because if they're dribbling the ball in the right back position, then that's not really a relevant stat. So it's how you manipulate those statistics to a degree, I think. He's undoubtedly a talent. I think we all know that. We all saw that last year, and equally he's shown shades of it this year. And without him, Norwich don't really look like they can create too much. So that's the problem. But equally, with him, he's ensuring that they can seek goals. And he lost the ball against Watford, but for me, the defence could have done a lot more. I think he was the closest player to Deulofeu when he put the ball in the back of the net, and he's ran pretty much half the length of the pitch. So it's difficult. I think for him, he just needs a bit more discipline positionally. I get because he's frustrated and because Norwich aren't playing or having the same amount of the ball they were last year, that he is dropping deeper to come and receive the ball. But he just needs, and this is where he does need to grow up a little bit as a footballer, and Farke said they'd had some frank discussions with the squad this week in terms of their mistakes. He's still a young guy and he can still develop. I think there's a frustration element for him. There's a frustration element for people towards him, because he is trying to get the ball, he is trying to do things. I don't think it's bad intentioned. I just think that he needs to be a bit more disciplined, because as you say, when you're in the left back position after 70 seconds, then that's an issue. But just on him being a number 10, I think at the moment, the way Norwich are, and it might be completely different in a 3, but that number 10 is almost designed to stop the other team, as opposed to using it to benefit Norwich.
When Zimmermann was at his best,
absolutely, someone who can tactically foul and stop attacks. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head how many yellow cards Marco Zimmermann got last year, but it was part of the reason why he was so effective. So if Norwich are going to have a more technical creator in that number 10 slot, then I think they are going to have to adapt how they play. So I think for me, I'd probably look to move him to the left and have him in front of Jamal Lewis when he's fully fit, but I would say there's certainly an argument for resting him at the moment. But equally, I don't think it would do the team as a whole particularly great from an offensive sense.
Because equally, I would say the same for Cantwell almost. Yeah. I would want Cantwell as the number 10 preferably, but we did see Daniel in pre-season play with sort of inverted wingers, with Buendia left and Roberts right, but clearly, as we've just been talking about with Roberts, that's never materialised in the league. Dan Smith has predicted, or his team is a 5-2-2-1, not a formation
straight off Football Manager.
That Byram, Amadou, Zimbo, Godfrey, Aarons as the back 5, Tetty and Leitner as your holding midfielders, Buendia, Hernandez just a bit ahead of them, and then Pukki up top. If Leitner comes back into things, I would, and you're playing 3 at the back, I would personally go with Tribal. just because I feel that he gets the best out of Leitner, and if you've got three at the back, you don't quite need two out-and-out defensive midfielders. But it's an interesting formation. Lorne Smyber says, see that we're getting linked to loads of players again. Yawn. No one will come in January. People will come in January. I'm fairly sure of that. But the one thing that is difficult when you're talking about January now is we've still got 8 games to go between now and the transfer window even opening. Of course, Stuart Webber and his scouts we know that he has spoken about it, how they have lists for certain situations, don't they? So there will be some players that they're hoping for or considering for January that if they're bottom and, say 8 points adrift or something of safety as January starts, those players are not going to be achievable. So they switch to another list. But as we sit today, they're only 4 points off with 8 games until then. There is no reason why Norwich cannot be out of the relegation zone by the start of January. And it doesn't seem likely, perhaps, as we sit here today, but it is definitely possible if they can get their act together and rediscover their sort of verve, as it were.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to talk about January. You can't predict it until we get that little bit closer. But Lorne has a point in that it will be a struggle to persuade some players if they are in the relegation zone, won't it?
Yeah, it will, but it's going to be the same for Southampton, and it's going to be the same for anyone else that's in the relegation zone. That's the nature. I think the main thing is, as you rightly said there, is making sure they're not cut adrift, because then you're looking at a completely different list of targets. And if you're bringing in players in January really for a championship campaign next season, then they're already coming into a team that's going to be used to losing games. That's a difficult mentality to switch. You only have to look at Huddersfield and how they started under Jan Siebert this season. And
the hangover.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So if they are, let's say, and let's hope they're giving themselves a shot at that point of survival, then again the players you can attract is different. And I don't think we're talking about a spending situation where they're going out and spending 8 or however much money on Stephen Naismith, but I think they will strengthen because they have to, because they haven't got enough centre-back options at the moment, and obviously Hanley's had reoccurring fitness issues, Zimmermann as well, since pre-season, so they're going to have to strengthen in that area. I think it's just going to be a case of who, but they're certainly not going to splash the cash, I think, and I don't think they would even if they were sat in 12th, so that's the situation they're in at the moment, and whatever they do, it will be in the style of the recruitment that they've sort of implemented since Webber came to the club, and with a long-term outlook as well, because if they do go down, then they are going to need to make profit on those players to ensure that they are on an even keel financially. So it's a difficult situation, but that's where they are.
Yeah, I don't think those lists will differ massively. I think Stuart and his recruitment staff will be very realistic, and they, in a way, will possibly even be fishing in a fairly small pool in terms of there's not going to be too many players, too many clubs sort of fishing in the same areas as them. The one thing that you can say ahead of January is that they're going to be looking at a defender, and a couple of them have been linked, and there was a German player, Koch, this week, wasn't there? But that it sounds like it's going to be a decent calibre of player to be attracting.
Linked with Leicester as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which shows that if Leicester are interested, then immediately out of Norwich's ballpark, I think, in terms of figures. So it's difficult. One that we can say that we've been saying it the whole time. The Sun and the local paper in Stoke keep banging the Jack Butland drum. As we've said from the first time that we reported those reports, it just does not seem likely. From what I've heard, Norwich aren't interested in him, and why would they? They've got Tim Krul and Ralph Fairman. So precisely.
We shall see. I think we can park January just for a little bit and focus on the immediate games. George Shotton says Mario Vrancic, of course, needs minutes, a creative spark who can pick out more opportunities in a lacklustre midfield, lacking in imaginative attack, and more opportunities for Pukki. I should have mentioned he adds. Yeah, sorry, I'd almost forgotten about Vrancic a little bit when I mentioned Leitner. I'd be surprised if Leitner starts ahead of Vrancic at the moment. Thinking about it, you would think that particularly in a three-man defence, the midfield in front, you would be very surprised if Vrancic wasn't playing alongside either Tetty or Tribal, wouldn't you?
There could even be an argument to push him up into a more advanced role.
Possibly. It's got more physicality.
Absolutely, and then have, because let's not forget that defensive midfield position has been an issue. So let's say Farke does opt to go for Tetty and persist with him as that third centre back, and then let's say has Amadou and McLean as the two with Ranjic in front, I think that gives you quite a nice solid base. I think I'd then probably be looking at a Hernandez-Pukki combination as the two with Hernandez sort of a loose runner, but then of course you're asking a lot of the wing-backs, so it's a really interesting one. I think if they do switch to the three as perhaps we expect, because there's certainly different variations, some that I can see having more of an effect than others, but I don't think it's beyond the realms that Vrancic will be involved. I think it's where they see him in that midfield, but they need to get that balance right, because that midfield hasn't quite been right all season for me, I don't think.
And he'll have needed some good training during this 2 weeks, because I thought he looked very rusty when he came on against Watford.
Yeah,
that's to be expected, of course, because he's not played much football since... Well, barely played football since the end of last season. So, and he did have a bit of a disrupted season with injuries here and there. Anyway, despite still, what was it, 10 goals and 9 assists, or
absolutely.
9 goals, 10 assists. So, we all know how good Vrancic can be if he can find his feet. So fingers crossed on that one. Shane Watts-Jones says Dermot is like a Matt Jarvis. I feel we won't see much of him. Very injury prone, if I'm honest. I think this is a question. Can you comment onto the social media situation where Emmy and Steepman have deleted their social media, potentially due to what fans are saying about them? Surely these bad comments need to stop. If not, they won't want to move at the club. I think you mean stay at the club. You wrote a piece on this, didn't you, on the social media? So I don't know whether it came up at the presser today.
No, it didn't actually. No.
I mean, we don't know that they've deleted their social media, or this is Instagram, isn't it? We don't know that they've deleted them because of abuse or because of bad comments or whatever. That it could just be they were sick of it and they didn't want to look at it. Their team are bottom of the table and they just thought, nah, it's not worth it. I just want to concentrate on my football. Can't be doing this. It doesn't... I mean, I don't really trawl the comments on their accounts, and I would hope that they don't either, but I've never personally seen people abusing them. Where the other side of that we will probably never know, and never know of any of the players in the squad, is if they are searching social media themselves for those comments. If Emi Buendia is going onto Twitter and Instagram and looking at that sort of stuff, and of course there's going to be negative comments about him after the Watford game. He made a massive mistake. He doesn't need telling on that front, does he? So we will, unless we get a chance to speak to either of them about that in the next few months, then we may never know, because players soon end their exile on social media, don't they? So it's an interesting one, but I don't think we can assume that people are being abusive, and if players are searching for their name to see what people are saying, then they shouldn't be doing that, frankly, should they? If you're a professional footballer, social media is a dangerous place, because people will say stuff. They're not expecting the players to read it, are they? It's not right that they may be saying things, and obviously if they're saying anything that's abusive and steps over the line, then it goes without saying that they shouldn't be saying that. But there's nothing wrong with people analysing football in a fair way on social media or in real life. But as a professional footballer, you've got to be strong enough. And Emi is 23 next month. He's not a kid anymore.
No.
You've got to be strong enough, and you've got to have that advice around you from your family and people at the football club to say, ignore social media. It doesn't matter. We had all this with Todd last year, where it was clear it sort of seeped into his awareness, I suppose, and it's just not healthy for them. If I was a footballer, I'd be like Christoph Zimmermann. I wouldn't be anywhere near it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it could be something as innocent as the team are in a bad run of form, they don't want any distractions. It could be as simple as that, but then do you go to the extremes of deleting it? I don't quite know. It's an interesting one. I think it raises probably wider questions about, as you said, footballers and their relationship with social media. It's interesting. I mean, I've heard Charlie Adam, former Stoke Blackpool midfielder, say on national radio, I think Peter Crouch has said it before on his podcast, that there are situations where there would be footballers who would go in and check their phone almost to see if they had a good performance or not, and judge it based on the responses they got.
That's worrying.
And it is, absolutely. And who knows? Like you say, we'll never know. But I certainly hope that's not been the case, because as you say, if they're constructive and they're having a discussion, a healthy discussion about football, then there's no harm in that. I think it's once you get to the personal stuff where the lines blur a bit, and that's not okay. But I can certainly see the arguments for and against being on it. I think perhaps it's not necessarily provoking positive comments at the moment, given the run of form we're in, but that's no excuse for any sort of abuse that they could be getting. But as we say, fundamentally, we'll never know the reasons as to why they've made those decisions.
Potentially, yeah. And I think if you're going to be on there, you have to take the rough with the smooth. You know, Emi Buendia, Todd, all these players, they were loving all the positivity last year when they were title winners. So you've got to expect it. I mean, we see it to a certain extent as journalists. When Norwich lose, we obviously get a bit of the brunt of it because a lot of the negative comments come towards us. But equally, when Norwich were winning the title last year, we were the best reporters around, you know, because we feel a little bit of the benefit from it, which is great. It's you know, creates a little bit of a buzz for people who get to report on the club. But I've certainly learned in my time covering football that you have to take things with a pinch of salt, because you need to find that sort of level ground. But when you talk about young footballers who aren't a 33-year-old who's worked in journalism for 12 years and has got used to it, I've grown up as a professional with social media, and I've learnt as it has grown into what it was. I mean, I remember literally when I worked in the newsroom in Scunthorpe, when I first started out as a sports journalist, I remember the politics reporter who was a similar age to me. He was the first one in the newsroom to be on Twitter and was telling us about it, and everyone being, what's that for? It's just like Facebook, isn't it? What's the need? So you're just going to tell people what you had for lunch and stuff. To think what it's grown into now, and for people to discuss, say, Emi Buendia's mistake, tapping away, talking to their mates or whoever their online circle is, that's not a problem. If they are mentioning Emi Buendia or whatever player into a negative post and angling it at him, then that's bang out of order. But if they're not doing that, if they're just having a reasonable conversation which is negative about his performance amongst themselves, but the player goes and actively finds that, then it's not those people's fault, is it?
It's a different situation.
It's such a complex issue, social media. And if I was, Stuart Webber or Daniel Farker, as much as I could, I would tell players, stay away from it as best you can, but if you're going to do it, don't search your name, and you've got to take the rough with the smooth.
Yeah, I think there's an argument, because if you are going to train, you need to listen to the right people as a player, particularly young players looking to develop. It's why now football clubs are rolling out courses on social media, and you only have to look at some old tweets that get dug up every so often. I think there was one of Dele Alli's this week after Mourinho got appointed, and it just shows that you have to be a little bit savvy on there. And look, there's certainly an argument, I think, to say that if you train and you play professional football, the only people you need to listen to are those at the club. And of course, supporters have their opinions there, and they're entitled to them. But I think if it was me, I'd certainly want to have that room where I could switch off from it. And I don't think social media is the best way to do that, particularly in a time like this where Norwich aren't picking up positive results. But if you're going to be in there and take all of the praise, then you have to take the negativity as well when that's warranted. So, yeah, as you say, so complex, but it is such a powerful tool, and probably unprecedented in football. If you think about footballers 10, maybe even 15 years ago, they wouldn't have had to deal with that. You know, they'd play the game, go home, and that would be it. And perhaps look at the player ratings and not be too happy with Pad the day after. But beyond that would be about it. So it's a different world now, isn't it? And I think as more young players come up, I think we'll see players get better and a bit more polished with that. And to the extent we're even seeing players like Anthony Martial who don't even run their own accounts. So that's where they are. Yeah,
you got to love a Instagram or Twitter account which is there just so that they can plug some free free gear that they've got. Right, just a few last comments and we better make a move. As I say, we've got to head up north this evening. Robin Race says Emi definitely a number 10. Dan Mayhew says Dan, as in Daniel Farker, always has good lines. You think he hinted at 3 at the back so he can push more men into the attacking midfield as centre midfield positions? Yeah, I think we sort of addressed that. And then Dan also says, sadly, social media is such a big part of people's life in the modern world. Of course, we are on social media as we speak on Facebook, so we probably shouldn't be too critical. And he continues, like or hate it, there is a wider issue here than a football show, which is very correct. I mean, I find discussion of social media and technology and the use of it very interesting, particularly for far more serious things than football. In terms of, what people take in terms of political news from social media. But let's not get stuck
Less
into that.
about that
We'll leave that for the election special next month. And just to finish on, Ben Ambrose, who I believe is your chum, is he, Ben Ambrose?
Sadly.
Are people seriously, after a season of being a fantastic winger, a player who's massively helped the development of Max Aarons, saying that Buendia is suddenly a number 10? Well, I think the one thing you could say about Buendia is he was never a sort of out-and-out winger, was he? He was always off and about and drifting around and in a free role. So we shall see. I think that the thing we're talking about here is the difference between the Championship and the Premier League, isn't it? And that really, I feel that Norwich have found so far that you can't allow your attackers to have the same sort of freedom. Look at Palace and Burnley when Norwich went there. So disciplined, so rigid, so they defend from the front. And I think we will see an element of that tomorrow from Everton, although they probably rate themselves a bit higher.
Yeah, it's a base. I think if Norwich have got to get that defensive setup to build from. I think particularly in this division, it's okay saying we're going to play this fantastic, lovely to watch philosophy, but if you're going to concede 4 goals and you're going to get every game, then you're going to get relegated. So if they do shore up that defensive midfield and get to a point where they aren't conceding as many chances and as many goals as they are, then they can look to play around with that number 10 role and perhaps have a bit more of a technical player in there. But at the moment, that player almost has to be responsible for the defensive side of the game to reduce that. And that's why as I said earlier, Marco Steepman was so effective in the Championship. And with him, it's almost like he doesn't really believe he can step up. I think Man City was probably his best example of stepping up at this level. Didn't really do too much on the ball, but it was more how he stopped Rodri and counteracted their defensive midfield. And
it was good
that almost feels like what Norwich's attacking midfield position is geared to do at the moment, as opposed to really impact things from an offensive sense. That tends to be more of the wingers' roles, and we call them wingers in inverted commas because they're not quite wingers. They both like to come inside and drive.
Wide midfielders, shall we say.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's interesting, but I think they've got more pertinent issues than whether Emi Buendia is a number 10 or not.
Yeah, and I don't see Daniel Farke dropping him, to be perfectly honest.
No, I don't.
But we'll head up to Everton and find out. Of course, you can follow it all with us at PinkUn.com. We'll have everything as usual back in match mode tomorrow, live updates. Head over to the app for all the sort of exclusive insight videos. Connor will keep things flowing on that front, and fingers crossed, we'll have a more positive journey to talk about. Let's just hope there's a goal. Still only been one away goal this season, hasn't there?
Not seen the away goal since I started this job yet.
Yeah, Anfield.
One day.
Opening night of the Premier League season, amongst all the glitz and glamour. That was when we last saw Norwich score away from home. So if we just have an away goal, I'll be happy. Well,
if it's a 7-1 defeat, then maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not. But at least we'll have something to talk about.
Exactly.
And Ben follows up with Safe Journey, chaps. So we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. We will catch up with you tomorrow.